Hello guys, this is Dark Fox Sage 2 and we are back with our new fanfic, which is What If Naruto Can't Let Go His Feelings for Sakura Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic, then please press the like button and please subscribe to the channel. It motivates me to upload more fanfic like these for you all. Now let's start the fanfiction. The morning sun draped Konoha in golden light, but inside the Hokage's office, everything felt gray. Naruto sat at his desk, fingers drumming rhythmically on a pile of untouched mission reports. The ink on the pages hadn't dried properly, he'd been distracted when he signed them. His thoughts lingered not on policy, not on infrastructure, not even on the peaceful new trade alliance with Suna. They lingered on the last time he saw Sasuke, on the quiet moment by the gates, when Sakura stood still, lips parted, hands clenched, watching him walk away for the final time. He hadn't looked back. Neither had she. But Naruto had. Every day since. Sakura worked longer shifts than she needed to. Konoha Hospital thrived under her direction, but those close to her could see it. The way she stared out the window when she thought no one was watching, the way she avoided certain streets, certain conversations. Naruto saw it all. He was the Hokage, after all. Seeing everything was his job, even the things no one dared to say. Especially those things. Their friendship never broke, but it stretched thin. Like a thread caught between moving wheels, stubbornly intact, dangerously close to snapping. They laughed sometimes. They worked together. They shared tea on cold evenings when the wind howled too loud for comfort. But between them, a silence always hung in the air, dense and heavy. A silence that neither of them dared to name. It began to change on a mission that should have been routine. An escort to the land of valleys, high risk only on paper. Naruto had taken Sakura with him, not for her chakra-enhanced strength or her healing, but because he wanted to be close to her. Maybe he just needed a change of scenery, or maybe he hoped something might shift if they were away from the familiar streets of Konoha. At first, it was easy. The laughter came back, easier than he expected. She teased him about his snoring, and he made fun of her overpacked scroll pouch. They walked shoulder to shoulder again, like they did when they were younger, when Team 7 still meant all three of them, and the road ahead was uncertain but full of promise. But the ambush changed everything. Naruto had barely sensed it before the first explosive tag went off, sending shrapnel into the side of their caravan. They were separated in the chaos, Sakura dragged into the forest by a rogue chakra user who had masked his signature too well. Naruto fought his way through smoke and flame to find her. He found her, but barely in time. She was hurt, not beyond healing, but seeing her crumpled against a tree trunk, blood soaking her uniform, awakened something in him he hadn't felt since the war. Rage. And fear. The kind that grips your throat and shakes you until your heartbeat drowns everything else out. He carried her back. He didn't leave her side for days, even when she told him to rest. He just sat by her hospital bed, watching her breathe. She was strong, always had been. But for the first time, Naruto realized that even Sakura could break. That she wasn't invincible, and that the thought of losing her was worse than any pain he had ever known. When she woke, her first words weren't thanks. They weren't about the mission. She looked at him with tired green eyes and asked, softly, "Why do you keep doing this?" He blinked. Doing what? She swallowed, her throat dry. Caring like this. Loving like this. He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched again, but this time, it was different. Raw. Fragile. You already know why, he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. She looked away, but not fast enough to hide the flicker in her expression, the truth, sharp and buried too long. He reached for her hand. You don't have to pretend anymore. Tears welled in her eyes. I'm not pretending. But you are, he said, softer now. You have been since he left. She didn't deny it, because they both knew the truth. Sasuke had taken a part of her heart with him. But he hadn't taken all of it. Naruto stayed silent, waiting. Letting her breathe. Letting her choose. And finally, she did. She laced her fingers with his. It wasn't a confession. Not yet. But it was enough. Enough to begin. She didn't let go of his hand that night. Naruto stayed at her bedside long after visiting hours passed. No one questioned him. Who would? The seventh Hokage didn't need permission. But more than his title, it was the look in his eyes that kept the nurses silent. A look that hadn't been there for years, soft and unguarded, like someone waiting for a wound to heal he didn't quite understand. Sakura didn't sleep much, but when she did, she would twitch like she was trying to reach for something in her dreams. Once, she murmured his name. Not loudly. Not the way she used to call him on missions. It was quiet, almost a breath. But he heard it. When she finally sat up the next morning, brushing strands of pink hair from her face, she found him asleep in the chair beside her, arms crossed, chin tucked forward, lips slightly parted. He looked younger like that. Like the boy who used to throw himself in front of Kunai just to make her smile. She reached out before she could stop herself. Her fingers barely brushed his cheek. His eyes opened. Blue, clear, and still tired, but alert in the way only a shinobi could be. She drew her hand back, unsure, but he caught her wrist gently and held it between his fingers like it was something precious. You okay? He asked, voice raspy from disuse. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Their eyes held for a moment too long. She finally pulled her hand back, curling it in her lap. He didn't press. He never did, not when it really mattered. She looked down at the bandage across her stomach. How bad was it? He hesitated. Bad enough. Her jaw tightened. I should have been more careful. I should have been faster. They both went quiet again. The air between them thickened, not with distance, but with the weight of things unsaid. That had always been their problem. Not a lack of emotion, but the inability to translate it into words. After a while, he leaned back in the chair, arms behind his head. You scared me, you know. I scare myself sometimes, she said quietly. He tilted his head toward her, eyes narrowed. Why do you keep pushing yourself like this? Her lips pressed into a thin line. Because I have to. No, he said, softer now. You don't. Not alone. Her chest tightened. I don't know how to do it any other way. Naruto sat up slowly, his voice low, not urgent, just real. Sakura, I'd carry it with you. If you let me. Something in her cracked. I know, she whispered. And still, she wouldn't cry. Not for Sasuke. Not for the years they lost. Not even for the ache in her chest that had nothing to do with the injury. Because Naruto was here. He always had been. Later that week, when she was well enough to walk, he took her to the top of the Hokage monument. They sat where they used to as genin, feet dangling over the edge, the wind brushing past their shoulders. It felt like nothing had changed. And everything. You remember the promise you made me? She asked, breaking a long silence. He glanced at her. Which one? The one about bringing Sasuke back. His expression didn't shift. Yeah, I remember. You kept it. He nodded. She looked at her hands. But you never made one for yourself. He said nothing for a moment, then spoke with surprising honesty. I didn't need to. I already knew what I wanted. She turned to face him, heart in her throat. What was it? His smile was faint, almost sad. You. It wasn't the kind of confession she expected. There were no fireworks. No grand declarations. Just a truth that had lived quietly between them for years, finally given a voice. Sakura didn't answer. Not with words. She leaned her head against his shoulder. And that was enough. Time passed differently after that. Their missions together grew more frequent. Though not officially assigned, Naruto often pulled strings to have her by his side. Not because he didn't trust others. But because he trusted her more. She noticed things about him now she hadn't before. How he always reached for his ramen with his left hand, but held kunai in his right. How his smiles had layers, some forced for the villagers, some for his comrades, and a few, rare ones, just for her. He noticed how she hummed under her breath when she was deep in thought. How she would rub the edge of her thumb when nervous. How her strength came not just from chakra, but from her quiet endurance. One night, after a long mission where they barely escaped a crumbling cave system, she stood outside his apartment door, soaked in rain and shaking from adrenaline. He opened the door wordlessly and let her in. She didn't explain. Didn't need to. They sat on his floor, backs against the wall, the sound of rain tapping against the windows. She leaned against him. He rested his chin on her head. Neither spoke of the things they felt, not yet. But they lived in it. Breathed it. Every glance, every brush of hands, every shared silence. It was enough to begin. The rain didn't stop that night. Outside, the village lay quiet under the steady rhythm of falling water, but inside Naruto's apartment, something stirred between them, fragile, new, and unspoken. Sakura didn't leave. She stayed curled against his side on the wooden floor, blanket wrapped around both of them, her hand resting lightly on his chest where she could feel his heartbeat, steady and warm. She fell asleep like that. He didn't. Naruto watched her breathe, her face softer in sleep, the tension that lived behind her eyes finally at rest. He'd seen her bleed, scream, and laugh, but rarely like this. Vulnerable, trusting, and here. Morning came slow, filtered through gray clouds and mist. When she stirred, blinking groggily at the unfamiliar ceiling, her first instinct was to pull away. To retreat. But his hand gently wrapped around hers, grounding her. Hey, he said, voice husky. Sleep okay? She nodded slowly. Yeah. They didn't talk about what it meant. Not that morning. He made tea. She helped fold the blanket. She tied her hair up while he quietly watched her from the kitchen doorway, knowing something had changed. It was in the way she smiled before she left. Small, unsure, but real. From that point on, it became routine. She stopped knocking. He started waiting. Sometimes she would show up after missions, bruised and silent, and he'd offer her a bowl of miso ramen or let her curl up in his bed while he worked late. Sometimes he would find excuses to drop by the hospital, dropping off lunch he didn't need to deliver or claiming he had a headache just to hear her scold him with that soft exasperation only she could manage. Neither of them called it love. Not yet. But it was there, rising between them like morning fog, slow, inevitable. They trained together more, too. Not because they had to, but because being around each other made sense. Sakura had always admired Naruto's growth, but now, seeing him move with confidence and clarity, seeing how the years had sharpened his raw talent into something quietly powerful, it made something stir in her. Not awe, not admiration. Desire. And guilt. Because Sasuke's shadow still lingered. Not between them, but inside her. A memory that had long since stopped hurting, but hadn't stopped echoing. One evening, after a spar that ended with her flat on her back and him laughing breathlessly over her, she stared at the sky and asked, "Do you ever feel like we're just pretending not to be broken?" He lay beside her, arms behind his head, breathing slow. All the time. And that's okay. He turned his head to look at her, expression unreadable. I think pretending's the only way you get strong enough to stop pretending. She blinked. He added, I'm not trying to be wise or anything. I stopped waiting to be fixed. I started living instead. Her throat tightened. When did you get so mature? He smirked. Must be all that paperwork. They laughed, and it was real again. But the next day brought a shift they couldn't ignore. An urgent summons. A rogue cell near the land of rain. Anbu dead. Intel missing. Naruto took command personally. Sakura didn't ask to join. He told her she was coming. The team moved fast, silent, efficient. But when the fighting started, everything unraveled. Sakura was separated again. Deliberately this time. The enemy wasn't just skilled. They knew her. Knew her movements, her style, her tells. Whoever they were, they wanted her alive. Naruto felt it in his bones the second she vanished. The same cold dread that had haunted him during the war. He didn't hesitate. He found her bound in a chakra-reinforced seal, bleeding and furious but alive. They fought together, side by side, like they always had. Like they were one. And when the last enemy fell, and the seal shattered, she collapsed into him, shaking. Not from injury. From the realization. She could have died. Again. And it would have destroyed him. He held her tight, burying his face in her hair, breathing her in like she was the only thing that tethered him to the world. You can't keep doing this, he said, voice trembling. I didn't choose it, she whispered. I don't care. His fingers curled into her cloak. Next time, don't let go. She didn't. That night, back in Konoha, there was no hesitation. She came to his apartment. Walked straight in. Took off her boots. Her flak vest. Her mask. He was already waiting. Neither of them spoke as she reached up and touched his face. His hand came up to cover hers. She kissed him. Not like a confession. Not like a resolution. But like a truth long denied finally given form. And when he kissed her back, it was everything. Years of waiting, hoping, hurting, healing. 1,000 words neither of them could say. They didn't talk that night. They just held each other in the quiet. And for once, there was no silence left between them. Only peace. Only love. And the slow, steady heartbeat of something real. Sakura woke before dawn, wrapped in the quiet stillness of Naruto's apartment. The sky outside had only begun to lighten, casting a pale blue hue through the window. She was warm, too warm, and realized it was because he still had one arm loosely draped around her waist. His breath was slow and even against her neck. She didn't move for a long time. This wasn't a moment she wanted to disturb. She had imagined 100 versions of waking up beside him over the years. But none of them felt like this. There was no grand, earth-shattering realization. No fiery epiphany. Just calm. Safety. A strange kind of serenity she'd forgotten she even needed. He stirred eventually, his voice still groggy. You're awake. Yeah, she whispered. He shifted, but didn't let her go. Are you okay? Sakura turned slightly so she could face him, their foreheads brushing. I think I've never been more okay. His smile was soft and tired. Good. She ran a hand along his jaw. You know this doesn't have to change anything, right? I know, he said. But I kind of want it to. She blinked, surprised. I want it to change everything, he added, barely above a whisper. Because I've been pretending too long. She didn't answer right away. Her fingers slid from his cheek to his collarbone, resting over his heart. Then let's stop pretending. It wasn't a promise. It didn't need to be. It was a beginning. A choice. They didn't label it. There were no declarations. No sudden shift in how they moved through the world. But people noticed. Ino caught on first. She cornered Sakura in the hospital one afternoon with a smirk. So, you and the Hokage, huh? Sakura barely looked up from her clipboard. What about us? Oh, come on. I've seen the way you two look at each other. Sakura didn't deny it, just gave a soft shrug. We're figuring it out. You deserve happy, Ino said simply, the teasing gone. Both of you. And maybe that was the strangest part. How natural it all felt. Like it had been waiting, patient and quiet, behind the walls they'd built around themselves for years. Naruto didn't change overnight. He was still loud sometimes, still exhausted from running the village, still terrible at remembering his own meetings. But now, there were moments when he'd pause in the middle of a briefing to glance out the window, because he knew she'd be waiting for him after. Sakura didn't stop pushing herself. But she came home now. Not just to a place, but to him. To someone who never asked her to be anything other than what she was, but still somehow made her want to be softer. Braver. Whole. And in the quiet moments, after training, after missions, after long days filled with decisions that changed lives, Naruto would hold her close, kiss her hair, and ask about her day like it was the most important thing in the world. Once, after a particularly long night, she looked at him across his apartment, him in his old orange hoodie, her in one of his shirts, and said, "Do you think this could have happened earlier?" He knew what she meant. "If we weren't so scared," he murmured, "maybe." "Of what?" "Of not being enough." Her voice was quiet. "You've always been enough for me." He looked up then, something breaking open in his chest. "Then why did it take us so long?" "Because we kept looking backward," she said. "Now we're finally looking at each other." He crossed the room, pulled her into his arms. "Then let's not look away again." They didn't. Not through the changing seasons. Not through new threats, or long missions, or the weight of leadership pressing on their shoulders. Love didn't make everything easier. But it made everything worth it. Even on the days when they fought, because they did. Over late arrivals, over reckless decisions, over ramen for dinner 5 days in a row, there was still that thread that connected them. Forged in fire, in war, in the years they'd spent growing up together and apart. Now they were learning to grow forward. Together. And it wasn't perfect. But it was real. And that was everything. Time moved forward, as it always did. Seasons passed quietly in Konoha. The trees bloomed and withered and bloomed again. Festivals came and went. Children trained in the academy. Missions were filed, completed, forgotten. Life continued its rhythm, and within that rhythm, Naruto and Sakura found something steady, something grounding. They never made a spectacle of what they had. There were no public displays, no formal announcements. Just the little things. The way Naruto's eyes softened when Sakura entered a room. The way she instinctively reached for his hand when they walked together. The subtle, unspoken comfort in their presence. For a long while, that was enough. Until it wasn't. It was the aftermath of a mission in the borderlands. Naruto had returned injured, not critically, but enough to shake her. His shoulder had been slashed deeply. He joked about it, like he always did, shrugging off the pain. But Sakura hadn't laughed. That night, she sat on the edge of his bed while he lay half asleep, bandages fresh around his chest. Her fingers were tangled together in her lap, unmoving. "You could have died." He opened his eyes, slow. "I didn't. But you could have," she said, voice low. "And I'm starting to realize that terrifies me more than I thought it would." He watched her for a long time, then reached for her hand. "I know." Sakura looked at him, her expression raw. "I used to worry about you because you were reckless. Now, I worry because you matter." The silence that followed was thick, unbroken until he pulled her down beside him, holding her tightly with one arm. "I've always mattered," he said softly. "But it's different when someone sees it." She buried her face in his chest, and for the first time in a long time, she let herself cry. It didn't last forever. It didn't need to. But something shifted in them again after that. They talked more. Not about love. They didn't need to. But about fears. About what they wanted. About the weight they carried. Naruto admitted how sometimes, late at night, he still wondered if he deserved peace. If he was doing enough. If he was becoming the kind of Hokage people truly needed. Sakura told him how she still felt like a shadow sometimes. Like her strength was borrowed, her place never fully her own. "You're wrong," he said, "every time. You're stronger than anyone I know. You're everything Konoha needs. Everything I need." She never argued when he said that. Because deep down, she wanted to believe it too. And slowly, she did. On the anniversary of the war, they stood together at the memorial stone. The names carved into black granite glistened with morning dew. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Naruto reached out, lacing his fingers with hers. The village had lost so much. But somehow, they'd found something. When they returned home that day, Sakura turned to him as he closed the door behind them. "I want this." Naruto paused, looking over his shoulder. "Want what?" "This," she said, stepping close, sliding her hands around his waist. "Us. Not just in the quiet moments. Not just after hard days. I want the future too. I want to come home to you and wake up beside you and build something real." Naruto was quiet for a beat. Then he smiled. Not the wide, boisterous grin he gave the world, but the soft one reserved only for her. Then let's build it. The weeks that followed were filled with more late nights, more tangled sheets, more mornings spent wrapped up in each other. But also, with plans. They didn't rush. They didn't need to. But they carved out a space for each other that wasn't defined by duty or war or history. It was defined by choice. And for people who had spent their lives surviving, choosing to stay, again and again, meant everything. One evening, sitting together on the roof of Hokage Tower, Sakura leaned her head against his shoulder. Below, the village glowed with lantern light. Children laughed. Someone played a flute in the distance. She whispered, "Do you think we would have found this if Sasuke hadn't left?" Naruto took a long breath before answering. "I don't know. Maybe. But it wouldn't have been the same. I don't think we would have been the same." She nodded slowly. "I think I used to love him because I didn't understand myself. I was chasing an idea, not a person." Naruto didn't speak. She turned her face into his neck. "But you saw me. All of me. And loved me anyway." He pulled her closer, pressing his lips to her forehead. "Always." And the sky stretched out above them, wide and endless and full of stars. Just like their future. The seasons rolled on. The world didn't wait for love to grow. Peace was always fragile, always tested. Border skirmishes, diplomatic tension, rogue factions. Naruto's responsibilities as Hokage never shrank, only multiplied. And Sakura? She had her own path, her own legacy to build. But through it all, they returned to each other. Even when weeks passed without a shared meal. Even when missions separated them. Even when exhaustion left them wordless at the end of the day. They never stopped returning. And it was during one of those long weeks, Naruto barely sleeping, running between meetings and security briefings, that Sakura came home early from the hospital, sat on the kitchen floor, and stared at a tiny white stick in her hand. The second line was faint. But it was there. Her hands trembled around it. She didn't tell him right away. Not because she was scared. But because it didn't feel real yet. She wanted to be sure. Wanted to say it out loud without her voice breaking from disbelief. But a few days later, when he stumbled through the door past midnight, his eyes heavy with fatigue and concern, she took his hand, led him to the couch, and placed the test in his palm. He blinked, confused, then froze. "You're serious?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Sakura nodded. He looked up at her, eyes wide, like he didn't quite know how to breathe. "You're going to be a dad," she said softly. And for a moment, Naruto Uzumaki, the Hokage, the hero of the war, the man who had faced gods, looked like a boy again. Like the orphan who had once longed for family, for belonging, for love. His fingers curled around the test gently, reverently. We're. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "We're having a baby." He laughed, shaky and disbelieving, and pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her shoulder. "I don't even know how to be a dad, Sakura." "You'll learn," she whispered. "We'll learn together." And they did. Pregnancy was never simple. Not when Sakura insisted on working halfway through her second trimester, not when Naruto hovered too much, and certainly not when the entire village seemed to treat her like royalty and glass at the same time. But it was also full of quiet beauty. Naruto talked to her belly every night, telling stories, some ridiculous, some soft. Sakura felt the first fluttering kicks while lying in his lap, watching the stars from the roof. He kissed her stomach like it was sacred. He read medical scrolls with furrowed brows and asked her 1,000 questions she already knew the answers to. And through it all, he held her hand. Always. The night labor began, it was snowing. Naruto nearly broke the door off its hinges trying to get her to the hospital. Tsunade had returned to assist with the birth, her presence both a comfort and a command. The hours dragged. Naruto never left Sakura's side. He didn't flinch at the screaming. Didn't look away from the pain. Just held her hand, whispered through clenched teeth. You've got this, Sakura. I'm right here. Always. Asterisk. When the baby's cry finally rang through the room, something broke inside them both. A boy. Tiny. Red-faced. Loud. Naruto held him like he was made of sunlight and lightning and everything he'd ever dreamed of. Sakura, exhausted and crying, reached out weakly. Let me see him. Naruto laid their son in her arms, brushing the hair from her sweat-damp forehead. What should we name him? She whispered. He was quiet for a long moment, then said, let's name him after someone who gave me strength. Someone who saved me when I didn't know how to save myself. She looked up at him, eyes wide. Jiraiya. Naruto shook his head slowly. No, someone else. Then he touched her cheek gently. I want to name him Haruki. Spring tree. Because you're my spring. You always were. She closed her eyes, cradling their son against her. Haruki Uzumaki. It's perfect. And in that hospital room, as snow fell softly outside, the boy who once had no one sat beside the woman who chose him, holding the child they created together. Love hadn't come easy. It hadn't been the kind of love people wrote about in storybooks. It had been scarred and patient, fierce and hesitant, built on battles and brokenness. But it was theirs, and that made it everything. The years that followed were not gentle, but they were kind in ways neither Naruto nor Sakura had ever expected. Raising a child while leading the village and maintaining the balance of peace was never going to be easy. But it was in the small moments, in the quiet in-betweens, where they found the truth of what they'd built. Haruki grew fast. Too fast, it often felt like. He had Naruto's eyes and Sakura's fire, but his own rhythm, his own presence. He wasn't loud like his father, nor as composed as his mother. He was thoughtful, curious, observant. The kind of boy who would sit quietly in the window, watching the rain, then ask questions about thunder and gods and where the sun slept when the sky went dark. Naruto would sit beside him on those rainy afternoons, still in his Hokage cloak, and answer every question with a seriousness that never failed to make Sakura smile. No matter how busy he was, he always found time. If not in the morning, then at night, lying on the floor with Haruki asleep on his chest, his hand resting gently on the boy's back. Sakura, too, adapted to a new kind of strength. Motherhood shaped her in ways war never had. She was still a force at the hospital, still the most brilliant medical mind in the village, but at home she was softness and warmth, the lullaby at the end of a long day, the quiet anchor when Naruto's world spun too fast. There were hard days, of course. Days when Naruto came home late, his face lined with fatigue and guilt. Days when Sakura had to shoulder everything alone, bathing, meals, stories, tantrums. Days when Haruki asked why his father couldn't tuck him in like the other parents at the academy. But they never let the distance grow too wide. Naruto once missed Haruki's first academy demonstration, called away to an emergency council with the other Kage. When he returned, long past midnight, he found Sakura waiting outside under the moonlight, arms crossed, eyes heavy. I'm sorry, he said before she could speak. I missed it. You did, she replied simply. And he waited. He kept looking at the door. Naruto didn't try to justify it. He just nodded, the guilt thick in his throat. Sakura stepped closer, resting her hand on his chest. You're doing your best. I know that. But don't forget, he's not waiting for the Hokage. He's waiting for his dad. That night, Naruto snuck into Haruki's room, knelt beside his bed, and whispered, I'm going to make it up to you, little sprout. I swear it. The next day, he took a full day off, his first in months. They went to the lake just outside the village, the three of them. No guards, no meetings, no formalities. Just a packed lunch, a fishing rod, and the laughter of a boy who finally had both of his parents to himself. Sakura watched them from the water's edge. Naruto crouched down beside Haruki, trying to bait a hook without getting tangled. She smiled, her heart full in a way that words couldn't capture. Later that evening, as the sun bled gold across the trees, Haruki fell asleep in the grass, his head resting on Naruto's leg. Sakura sat beside them, her fingers intertwined with Naruto's. "We've come a long way," she said quietly. Naruto looked at her, brushing his thumb over her hand. "I don't know how we made it sometimes. We didn't give up," she murmured. "Even when it hurt. Even when it would have been easier to look away." He leaned in and kissed her, softly, without urgency. Just a quiet reminder. That night, back in the village, Naruto tucked Haruki into bed and lingered a while longer, brushing the boy's hair back from his forehead. "You know," he whispered, "when I was your age, I didn't have anyone. No mom, no dad, no bedtime stories. But you've got so much more. And I promise I'll be here, no matter what." Haruki stirred faintly, half asleep, and mumbled, "Love you, Dad." Naruto closed his eyes. That simple phrase, it undid something deep in him. Not because it was unexpected, but because it was so freely given. So natural. So human. And maybe that was what he and Sakura had created. Not just a child, not just a family, but a new legacy. One rooted not in pain or sacrifice or war, but in love. Years passed, like petals drifting downstream, quiet, relentless, carrying everything with them. Haruki grew into a boy with more questions than patience, a quiet storm of thoughtfulness and occasional mischief. He trained hard, not because anyone expected him to, but because he wanted to understand where he came from. What it meant to be an Uzumaki. A Haruno. What it meant to live under the legacy of a man who bore the weight of the world and a woman whose strength could bring mountains to their knees. But Naruto never pushed him. He didn't want his son to grow up under shadows, of the Hokage's name, or of a war that had ended before he was born. He wanted him to find his own path. So he let Haruki fall. Let him struggle. Let him choose. Sakura, on the other hand, was often the balance between quiet support and unrelenting discipline. She was gentle when it mattered and steel when it counted. Haruki adored her, feared her a little, too, but the kind of fear that came with respect. There were nights Haruki would come home bruised from training, his ego limping more than his body. And Sakura would sit beside him, rub ointment into the scrapes, and say softly, "You're not weak. You're learning." Even your father had to learn. Sometimes, Haruki would glance toward Naruto, sitting at the table with a cup of cold tea, and ask, "Is that true?" Naruto would grin, wide and warm. "I was the worst in the academy. No one believed in me. I failed more times than I can count." Haruki never said anything in response. But later that night, when the house was quiet and the stars blinked sleepily outside, he'd go back to practicing. Quietly. Determinedly. Alone. By the time Haruki turned 10, whispers had begun around the village. They said he had his mother's control and his father's chakra. That he would someday surpass them both. But neither Naruto nor Sakura paid the rumors much mind. Because the truth was, they didn't care if he became a shinobi or not. All that mattered was that he became kind. Strong in heart. Unshaken in spirit. But life, as always, had its own ideas. A mission went wrong. Not for Haruki. He was still too young for anything beyond basic training. But for Naruto, a political meeting turned ambush. Hidden blades. Poisoned words. A wound that bled too deeply. He came back to Konoha carried on a stretcher. The whole village held its breath. Sakura didn't cry when she saw him. She just pushed everyone out of the way, snapped orders, and worked until her chakra nearly burned out of her veins. Her hands were steadier than her heart. Her mind sharper than the terror behind her ribs. Naruto floated between worlds for 3 days. In the silence of the hospital room, Haruki sat by his father's bedside, clutching his unmoving hand. He didn't ask questions. He didn't cry. He just sat there, day after day, waiting. Until finally, Naruto's eyes blinked open. And the first thing he saw was his son, leaning forward, whispering, "You came back." Naruto managed a tired smile. I promised, didn't I? Haruki didn't answer. Just leaned in, resting his forehead against Naruto's arm. Sakura stood in the doorway, a hand pressed over her mouth. After Naruto was discharged weeks later, still pale, still healing, they returned home to a house that suddenly felt too quiet, too fragile. That night, Naruto woke from a dream that felt more like a memory. He sat up, sweat clinging to his skin, and found Sakura already awake beside him, watching. You died, she said quietly, her voice flat. You stopped breathing. For 3 seconds. I didn't want to go, he whispered. She looked at him, and something in her finally broke. Not in anger, not in blame, but in relief. Raw, overwhelming relief. She moved closer, cupped his face in both hands, and kissed him like it was the last thing she'd ever do. And then she whispered something he'd never heard from her before. Don't you ever leave me again. He didn't promise that he wouldn't. He couldn't. The life they lived, the world they served, was too uncertain. But he pulled her into his arms and held her like he could rewrite fate with his grip alone. Haruki stood outside their door, not meaning to eavesdrop, but frozen by the sound of his mother's tears. It was the first time he'd ever heard them. He didn't go back to bed that night. He sat by the front door, kunai at his side, as if his 10-year-old hands could protect the family he now knew could be taken in an instant. In the years that followed, Haruki trained harder, laughed less, focused more, and Naruto, though he hated the weight in his son's eyes, knew that the boy had crossed an invisible line, one all shinobi do. The moment where childhood ends, and the world becomes a little sharper. Sakura saw it too, and she made sure Haruki had balance. She took him to the flower shop once a week. Made him read books that had nothing to do with war or chakra. Taught him how to cook. How to heal. How to love something fragile without needing to protect it. It worked. Mostly. But sometimes, Naruto would catch his son standing on the Hokage monument at dusk, staring down at the village with a look that reminded him too much of his own reflection. One day, he stood beside Haruki and said, You don't have to carry it all. Haruki didn't look away. But someone has to. Naruto closed his eyes. The weight of legacy was a strange thing. It could lift or bury you, depending on how it was carried. He placed a hand on Haruki's shoulder. Then let me teach you how. And as the wind swept across the mountain, father and son stood side by side, 2 pieces of a story still being written. When Haruki entered the academy, there were whispers, not malicious, just the weight of expectations trailing behind him like a second shadow. People watched him closely, too closely. Some wondered if he'd surpass his father. Others doubted he'd ever live up to the name. But Haruki didn't care. He wasn't interested in living up to anything except the quiet vows he made to himself under the stars and above the village rooftops. That he'd protect what his parents built. That he'd never let anyone suffer alone. That he'd never take peace for granted. He wasn't loud, not like Naruto had been. But there was something in his silence that commanded attention. He was sharper than most in his class. Quick with his hands, quicker with his thoughts. A strategist in the making. But he didn't flaunt it. He let others talk. Let them underestimate him. Naruto watched from a distance, remembering what it felt like to be the loud one, the underestimated one, the underdog. Watching his son take a different path was strange, but it wasn't wrong. It was Haruki's. And that was enough. Sakura, on the other hand, made sure Haruki had more than just strength. She introduced him to books on history, on medical ninjutsu, on chakra networks. She taught him about people, how to read them, how to listen. How sometimes saving a life came not through jutsu, but through words. By the time Haruki graduated, he wasn't just a shinobi. He was a symbol of something new. But he never acted like one. Team 13 was formed a week after graduation. Haruki was placed with 2 other rookies, Riku, a loud, impulsive boy with fire release and no patience, and Amari, a girl from the Aburame clan with a quiet voice and deadly precision. Their Jonin was Hane, a war veteran with scars on her face and kindness in her eyes. At first, they didn't work well together. Haruki was too used to solving things himself. Riku talked over everyone. Amari kept to herself. But Naruto had told his son something long ago: you don't grow stronger alone. So Haruki tried. He listened to Riku's wild ideas, even when they made no sense. He asked Amari questions until she stopped hiding behind polite silence. He made space for them, trusted them, and slowly, something began to shift. Their teamwork sharpened. Missions grew smoother. They started laughing more, arguing less, becoming a team not just in name, but in spirit. Hane watched them quietly, rarely praising out loud, but the rare smile she gave meant more than words. Naruto and Sakura followed from a respectful distance. They didn't interfere, didn't pull strings, just watched. But there were moments, after missions, after long days, when Haruki would return home and find them waiting with dinner, or tea, or nothing more than silence and warmth. And in those moments, he remembered what he was fighting for. One night, after a particularly rough mission, Haruki sat outside the house, staring up at the moon. Naruto joined him, handing him a rice ball without a word. Haruki took it, chewing slowly. After a long pause, he said, "Is it always like this?" Naruto glanced at him. "Like what?" "This weight. Like you're responsible for things even when you're not." Naruto was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yeah, it is." Haruki frowned. "How do you deal with it?" Naruto leaned back, gazing at the stars. "You remember that you're not alone. And you forgive yourself, even when it hurts." Haruki didn't respond, but he stayed there, shoulder brushing his father's, until the moon dipped lower and the night grew still. Sakura watched from the window, heart full and aching at once. Time passed again. Haruki made Chunin before most of his class. Not because he was stronger, though he was, but because he made others better. He led without arrogance, sacrificed without hesitation. But the more he rose, the more people began to compare him to Naruto. And for the first time, Haruki began to wonder if he'd ever be seen for himself. He brought it up once, softly, at the dinner table. "I don't think I can be like you," he said, not looking up. Naruto didn't speak. Sakura did. "You're not meant to be like him," she said gently. "You're meant to be Haruki. That's more than enough." Naruto smiled then. "Besides, you're already better than I was at your age." Haruki rolled his eyes, but the tension in his shoulders eased. And later that night, he sat at his desk and wrote something down, a list of things he wanted to do, not because anyone expected them, but because he chose them. The next morning, he tucked the list into his flak jacket, close to his heart. It wasn't about being a hero. It wasn't about proving himself. It was about protecting the world his parents had helped rebuild. A world where love could grow in silence. Where strength didn't need to roar. Where a boy with his mother's eyes and his father's fire could carve his own path into the heart of history. Years flowed by like a steady river, slow but constant. Haruki became a Junin. The weight of responsibility never truly left, but it began to fit him better, more comfortably, as if he'd always been meant to wear it. He had grown into the Hokage's son, yet he had become something else entirely. A protector, a strategist, a quiet force of nature that carried the legacy of his parents while forging a future that was entirely his own. Naruto, though never without a presence, started to step back. There was a shift in the air around him, something gentle, as if he was learning to let go of the reins just a little bit more. He wasn't done being Hokage. He was far from it, but there was a part of him, an unspoken part, that found solace in the way Haruki stood on his own. Sakura was still a beacon of strength in their home, but her hands had softened. She spent more time at the hospital now, training the next generation of medics, and occasionally, when things were calm enough, she would be found by Haruki's side, offering wisdom and support. There were fewer nights where she spent sleepless with worry, because she knew her son could handle the world. But not everything was peaceful, not always. Haruki found himself caught in missions that blurred the lines between friend and enemy, between duty and compassion. He'd lost comrades, seen villages fall. He didn't wear it openly, but it weighed on him, like it weighed on every shinobi who had ever sworn an oath to protect. One late evening, he returned home, his steps tired but deliberate. Sakura was in the kitchen, already making dinner, the scent of miso soup floating in the air. "You're late," she said without looking up, her voice calm, steady, like she always was when she knew something was bothering him. Haruki's eyes flickered to her, and he didn't have to say anything for her to know. Her hands froze for a second, then she continued chopping vegetables. "I'm okay," Haruki said softly, more to convince himself than her. She nodded, but there was something in her gaze. A knowing. "I'm not sure I want to be Hokage," he said suddenly, the words leaving him before he had time to reconsider them. Sakura didn't look up from her chopping. She didn't need to. "You're not supposed to want it," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "You're supposed to earn it." He didn't know if he understood what she meant. It wasn't just about being Hokage. It was about living up to the name. The legacy. I don't want to disappoint anyone," he muttered. "You won't," Sakura said, her voice firmer now. "No matter what you do, you won't disappoint us. You've already done more than enough just by being you." Haruki didn't respond. He walked past her and sat down at the table, staring at the rice in front of him, wondering how long it would be before he could answer his own question. The door slid open, and Naruto walked in, as if on cue, his presence still commanding, even when his steps were slower than they once were. Naruto had changed, too. No longer the energetic, always on the move Hokage, he'd begun to age in ways Haruki couldn't ignore. His hair had grayed slightly at the temples, his posture was more weary, and though his smile never wavered, the light in his eyes had dimmed ever so slightly. Time, as it always did, caught up. "How was your mission?" Naruto asked, leaning against the doorframe, watching his son with a soft expression. "Same as usual," Haruki replied. "Nothing I couldn't handle." Naruto smiled, but there was a hint of concern beneath it. "Good. But don't forget, it's okay to lean on us, Haruki. You don't have to bear the world alone." Haruki looked up, meeting his father's eyes. The words hit him like a wave crashing over him, because for the longest time, he thought he was the one holding everything together, that his parents' strength was a shield he couldn't pierce. But maybe, just maybe, they had been holding him up all along. "I'm trying," he said, his voice quiet. Naruto walked over to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. The weight of it wasn't heavy, it was grounding. "You're doing great. Just remember, there's no shame in needing help." Haruki nodded, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like the world wasn't just his to carry. It was a week later when the next challenge came. The village had heard rumors of a rogue faction stirring in the shadows, an organization with ties to a past they'd hoped was long buried. Haruki was chosen to lead a special team to investigate and eliminate the threat. He knew it would be dangerous. There would be no room for hesitation, no time for second chances. His team trusted him, just as his parents had trusted him, but there was still a cold lump of fear in his stomach. Naruto, sensing the weight of the mission on his son, called him aside the night before he left. "Haruki," Naruto began, "you've grown into someone I can't even describe in words. But tomorrow, remember one thing." Haruki turned to face his father, uncertain. "Don't lose yourself," Naruto continued, his voice low but steady. "You're my son. And you're her son. No matter what happens, I know you'll come back. Just don't forget who you are when the mission's over." It was simple advice, but it struck him harder than any battle ever could. The next morning, as Haruki and his team left the village gates, he turned once more to glance back at Konoha. The Hokage monument stood tall behind him, but in that moment, the village didn't seem so large. It wasn't the weight of the world on his shoulders, it was something different. It was the quiet belief of those who loved him. It was the knowledge that, for all the missions and challenges ahead, he had something that could never be taken away. When he came back, no matter what happened, he would still be Haruki. And that, he realized, was all he needed to be. The days that followed the mission were quiet, almost unnervingly so. The village was still recovering from the whispers of the rogue faction, and Haruki found himself caught in the aftermath of a battle that had been far from just physical. There were reports to file, casualties to be mourned, and decisions to be made. As the leader of his team, it wasn't just the victory that weighed on him, it was the lives that were lost. The people who had trusted him to bring them back. When he returned to the village, there were no grand celebrations. No speeches. Just the same quiet hum of life continuing despite the chaos that had unfolded. He walked through the gates, head held high, but something felt different. It wasn't the village. It wasn't the mission. It was the silence in his heart, the questions that had been building ever since he'd left, questions about who he was and what he truly wanted. Sakura was waiting for him at home. The sight of her, always the same calm presence, somehow brought both comfort and an ache that Haruki couldn't place. She had always been there for him, through all the years, and yet now, in this moment of quiet, he wondered if he had ever truly seen her for the strength she carried, the way she held the pieces of their world together even when everything was falling apart. "Welcome back," she said softly as he entered, her voice gentle but full of understanding. Haruki paused at the door, unsure of how to explain the storm that was brewing inside him. "I did what I had to do," he said, his words clipped. But it wasn't enough. Sakura didn't say anything right away. She simply walked over and placed a hand on his arm, as if grounding him. "Sometimes, what we do isn't about the end result. Sometimes, it's about making sure the people who depend on you know that you tried, that you cared. And you did that." He didn't respond immediately, but the knot in his chest loosened just slightly. That night, after a quiet dinner, Haruki found himself unable to sleep. His thoughts kept circling back to the mission, to the team he'd led, to the people he'd lost. The faces of the fallen haunted him more than he cared to admit, their voices echoing in his mind. There was no escaping the weight of it. No escaping the part of him that knew he could never be fully prepared for the price of peace. He stood up from his bed, walked over to the window, and stared out at the moonlit village. Konoha was at peace. But at what cost? And was that peace really the kind he could protect? Naruto was awake, as he often was when Haruki couldn't sleep. He found his father sitting on the porch, gazing out at the night sky, just like he had on those quiet nights when Haruki was younger. When everything seemed so much simpler. "Dad," Haruki began, his voice low, "do you ever wonder if this is all enough?" Naruto didn't look at him right away. He just kept his eyes on the horizon, his face unreadable in the moonlight. "Enough for what? Enough to justify everything we do. All the sacrifices. The people who fall along the way. Is it worth it?" Haruki's voice broke on the last words, as if finally allowing himself to feel the weight of the question he had been carrying for so long. There was a long pause before Naruto spoke, his voice quiet and heavy with something Haruki couldn't quite place. "You're asking the hardest question, Haruki. And the answer is different for everyone. Some people will tell you that it's not worth it, that you can't bring back the ones you lose, that you'll never be able to change the past. But what they don't tell you is that it's not about the people you lose. It's about the people you protect." Haruki shifted slightly, trying to understand. "But how do I keep protecting them when I can't even protect myself from the things I've done?" Naruto finally turned to face him, his expression softening. "You don't have to protect everyone on your own. That's what I had to learn, too. You don't have to carry it all. Not by yourself. It's okay to lean on others. It's okay to let go sometimes. We're all here, Haruki. And we always will be. Haruki felt a lump form in his throat. He had been so focused on the responsibility, the weight, that he had forgotten what Naruto was trying to say. It was never about being alone in it. It was about learning to trust, learning to share that burden. I'm scared, Haruki admitted quietly. Scared that I'll never be enough. That I'll fail the people who believe in me. Naruto stood up then, walking over to him, and placed a hand on his shoulder. You're already more than enough. More than I could have ever hoped for. There was no need for more words. Haruki knew that his father had always been there, through every failure, every victory, and every moment of doubt. And now, more than ever, Haruki understood that it wasn't about perfection, it was about doing his best, every day, for the people who mattered. As the days passed, Haruki found himself adjusting to the weight of his responsibilities. The missions were still dangerous. The risks were still high. But there was a shift in him, a quiet confidence, built on the understanding that he wasn't alone. That he didn't have to bear the world on his shoulders, no matter how heavy it seemed. One evening, as he sat at the dinner table with his parents, he found himself reflecting on everything that had led him to this moment, the lessons, the sacrifices, and the quiet strength that had been passed down to him. Sakura smiled softly across the table, her eyes full of warmth. You're not just your father's son, Haruki. You're your own person, and you're doing more than enough. And in that moment, for the first time in a long time, Haruki believed her. He didn't have to be perfect. He didn't have to be anyone else. He only needed to be Haruki. And that, in itself, was enough. As the seasons changed, so did the world around Haruki. The village, which had once seemed so vast and complicated, now felt like home in a way it never had before. He had found peace in the idea that it wasn't about perfection, that every day brought new opportunities to learn, grow, and protect those he loved. He began to realize that he wasn't just the Hokage's son, nor was he just the man tasked with leading the next generation. He was part of a much larger picture, a story that had been written long before his time, but that he could help shape as it continued. The next few months were filled with missions and responsibilities, but Haruki's internal transformation was more profound than anything external. He started connecting with his fellow shinobi on a deeper level. He spent more time with his team, fostering bonds that were not just based on duty, but on friendship, trust, and respect. He understood now that these were the things that made a leader not just powerful, but effective. One particular mission stood out in his mind. It wasn't one of high stakes or perilous danger, it was a simple scouting mission, assigned to him and a few other Junin. However, it was on this mission that Haruki found himself contemplating the meaning of his role in a way he never had before. The mission took them to the outskirts of the village, near the land where the remnants of old battles had left their scars. They were tasked with ensuring that the border regions were secure, and while there, Haruki found an old training ground, one long abandoned but still holding remnants of past lives. The stone walls were weathered, the wooden structures rotting with age, but there was something about the place that pulled at him. It wasn't just the quiet, it was the sense of history, of sacrifices made long before his time. Sitting there, gazing at the remnants of the old training ground, Haruki found himself thinking of his father, of the village, and of the people who had come before him. He thought of Naruto's words, "It's not about being perfect, it's about doing your best for the people who matter." It was such a simple truth, but it had changed everything for him. When he returned to Konoha, there was a new sense of clarity in his eyes. He had no illusions anymore about being a perfect leader, about being the best shinobi. He simply wanted to be the kind of man who inspired others to rise with him. Haruki, Sakura said one evening, catching him after a long day of training. You've changed. Haruki met her eyes, her gentle smile and the way her gaze held him steady. I guess I have. In more ways than I ever expected. I'm proud of you, she said, her voice warm with that familiar motherly affection that never seemed to fade, no matter how old he got. Sakura's words hit him with more weight than he anticipated. In all the years of missions and battle, in all the times he'd been expected to stand strong, he realized he had never truly understood the depth of what it meant to be proud of someone. It wasn't about achievements or titles, it was about seeing someone grow into who they were meant to be, in their own time, in their own way. As Haruki stood there, with the setting sun casting a golden glow over the village, he understood something deeper than ever before. He wasn't alone. He had never been alone. And his journey, though still young, was far from over. The months continued to pass, and with them, more responsibilities. More challenges, but also more moments of quiet reflection. As he began to step into his own as a leader, he found himself confiding in Naruto more, seeking his advice, asking questions he had never asked before. One evening, Haruki walked into the Hokage's office, where Naruto was poring over paperwork. His father looked up, giving him that warm, easy smile. "What's on your mind?" Naruto asked, as if nothing had changed over the years. Haruki paused, then took a seat across from him, his gaze thoughtful. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, the part about protecting people, and not bearing the weight of it all alone. I think I've been struggling with that for a while, but I don't know how to stop." Naruto leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if taking in every word. "It's not about stopping, Haruki. It's about finding the balance. You can't just let go of everything. This village needs you, the people need you, but you don't have to carry it by yourself. There's always someone there to help, always someone willing to hold the weight with you." Haruki's hands tightened on the arms of the chair, the words sinking deep into his thoughts. "I've always been afraid of letting people down. Afraid that if I let my guard down, I won't be strong enough to protect everyone." Naruto's gaze softened, the weight of his own past experiences reflected in his eyes. "You don't have to carry that fear with you, Haruki. Strength isn't about never being afraid. It's about choosing to stand up, even when you are. And it's about trusting the people around you to help you stand tall." There was a long silence between them, filled with the sounds of the village outside. Haruki couldn't explain it, but in that moment, everything seemed to make sense. The village, the responsibility, the weight, it was all part of something much bigger than just him. It was about all of them, together, working toward a future where they all stood side by side. The rest of that night was spent in quiet contemplation, both father and son reflecting on their journey, their lives, and the future ahead. Haruki didn't have all the answers, and he knew he never would. But for the first time, he didn't feel like he needed to. He had found his place in the world, not as a replacement for his father, not as someone else's idea of what he should be, but as himself. As Haruki. And that was enough. As the days grew into months, Haruki's role as a leader became more natural. He found himself guiding the next generation, passing on the lessons his father had taught him, while still learning new ones from the people around him. The village was thriving in a way it hadn't in years, and although peace reigned, there was always a sense of vigilance, a reminder that the world would never be completely free of chaos. The quiet evenings became a time for reflection, but also for deeper bonds with his family and friends. One such evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Haruki found himself walking through the streets of Konoha, his thoughts heavy with the weight of leadership. He had become accustomed to the quiet responsibility of it, but there were times when he longed for the carefree days of youth, before the world had grown so complex. He stopped by the training grounds, where Sakura often spent her evenings when she wasn't in the hospital. She was practicing her healing techniques, her movements graceful and fluid, as if she were one with the earth itself. Haruki watched her for a moment, entranced by the strength and poise she carried. She caught sight of him and paused, a small, knowing smile crossing her face. "What brings you here, Haruki?" He smiled back, his heart lightening at the sight of her. "I was just thinking about everything, about what it means to lead, to be strong, and how sometimes, I still don't feel like I'm enough. Sakura set down her tools and walked over to him. Her gaze was soft, filled with understanding. You don't have to be perfect, Haruki. You've always been more than enough. You've been carrying the village, your team, all on your shoulders. But you're not alone. You never were. Haruki swallowed, his throat tight. I know, but sometimes, I feel like I'm failing. That no matter what I do, it's not enough. Sakura reached out, resting a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was warm, grounding him in a way he hadn't realized he needed. You're not failing, Haruki. You're learning, you're growing, and that's all any of us can do. There was something in her words that struck deep within him. It wasn't just reassurance, it was a reminder that strength wasn't about perfection. It was about perseverance. It was about the will to keep going, no matter how heavy the burden. I've learned a lot from you, Sakura, Haruki said quietly. About what it means to truly protect others. I think I'm finally beginning to understand that it's not about carrying the weight alone, but about knowing who to lean on. About trusting the people around you. Sakura smiled, the warmth in her eyes making his chest ache with something he couldn't quite define. And I'll always be here to lean on, Haruki. We all will. The night fell into a comfortable silence, and for the first time in a long while, Haruki felt at peace. He didn't have to have all the answers. He didn't have to be the perfect leader. What mattered was that he was present, that he was learning, and that he had people like Sakura by his side. As the days passed, Haruki's understanding of leadership deepened. He found himself taking on more responsibilities, both in the village and within his team. His relationship with his teammates grew stronger as they trusted him more, not just as a leader, but as a person. He had come to realize that his role was not about being the best, but about guiding others to be their best. One evening, after a particularly challenging mission, Haruki sat in the Hokage's office with his father, Naruto. They were reviewing reports, discussing future plans, when Naruto suddenly paused, setting down his papers. You've changed, Haruki, Naruto said, his voice quiet but filled with a sense of pride. You're not just following in my footsteps anymore. You're finding your own path. Haruki looked up from his papers, meeting his father's gaze. I'm still trying to figure it out. But, I think I'm finally getting there. Naruto leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. I know you are, and I'm proud of you. More than you can imagine. Haruki felt a lump form in his throat. For so long, he had sought his father's approval, worried that he wasn't living up to the expectations placed on him. But now, hearing these words, he realized that his journey wasn't about meeting someone else's standards, it was about creating his own. Thanks, Dad, Haruki said quietly. Naruto's smile was soft but genuine. You're going to make this village proud. I have no doubt about that. The conversation shifted after that, but Haruki couldn't shake the feeling that something inside him had shifted as well. He was no longer just the Hokage's son. He was Haruki, the leader, the protector, the man who was carving his own place in the world. As time went on, Haruki continued to evolve in his role. He balanced his responsibilities with moments of quiet reflection, taking time to check in with his friends and family, to make sure they were well. He never stopped questioning himself, but now, his doubts were not rooted in fear of failure, they were born of a deep desire to be the best version of himself, not just for his village, but for the people he loved. Sakura, ever the steady presence in his life, remained by his side. Her support was unwavering, and he found himself confiding in her more often, trusting her insights and her perspective on the challenges they faced. The bond they shared deepened in a way that neither of them had anticipated, moving from friendship to something more complex, more intimate. One evening, as they sat on the roof of the Hokage's tower, watching the village lights twinkle below, Haruki turned to Sakura, his heart beating faster than he expected. Sakura, do you ever think about the future? About what we'll do after all of this? She looked at him, her gaze soft but curious. I think about it sometimes. About what comes next. But I think, as long as we're together, we'll be okay. Her words, simple but profound, settled into his heart. Together. It was something he hadn't fully realized until now. The future wasn't about what he could achieve alone, but about what they could achieve together. Haruki reached out, gently taking her hand in his pulse quickening. I don't know what the future holds, but I want to face it with you. With everyone. Sakura smiled, her eyes sparkling with something unreadable. Me too. In that moment, Haruki understood the true meaning of strength. It wasn't just about fighting for the village, for peace, it was about fighting for those you loved, for the bonds that made life worth living. And with Sakura by his side, with his family, his team, he knew that the future, no matter how uncertain, was something they would face together. And that, he thought, was enough. As the seasons passed, Haruki's role as both a leader and a son began to evolve into something deeper, more meaningful. The village was peaceful, but there was always the undercurrent of responsibility that tugged at him, reminding him that peace was never permanent. There would always be challenges to face, always something to protect. But now, Haruki wasn't so focused on the weight of the world. He had learned to trust the people around him, to lean on them when needed, and to let them lean on him in return. It wasn't a burden anymore, it was a shared responsibility, one that brought them closer together. One day, as Haruki walked through the village, he found himself reflecting on just how far he had come. He had been a young boy once, full of doubts and insecurities, always trying to measure up to expectations. But now, he was a man who knew his worth, not because of his father, or his title, but because of the people who believed in him. He stopped in front of the memorial stone, where the names of the fallen heroes of the village were etched in stone. The wind whispered through the trees, and for a moment, Haruki closed his eyes, feeling the weight of those names. His father's name was carved there, along with the names of countless others who had sacrificed everything for the village's survival. Haruki's heart swelled with pride. They had fought for something more than just a village, they had fought for the people they loved, for a future where peace could exist. And now it was his turn to protect that future. Thinking about them, a voice broke through his thoughts. Haruki turned to see Sakura standing beside him, her gaze thoughtful as she looked up at the stone. Her presence was a comfort, as it always had been. She had stood by his side through so many battles, both literal and emotional, and now she was here, reminding him that even in moments of quiet reflection, he was never alone. Yeah, Haruki replied, his voice low. I'm just trying to understand it all, you know. The responsibility, the weight. It's a lot. Sakura placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch light but firm. It's a lot, but you're not alone in it. You have us, your team, your family. And we're with you, no matter what. He nodded, grateful for her words. She always knew exactly what to say, when to speak, and when to remain silent. There was comfort in the stillness between them, a bond forged through years of friendship and shared struggles. Thanks, Sakura, Haruki said quietly. For everything. Sakura smiled, her eyes warm. Always, Haruki. The two stood there for a while longer, the wind rustling the leaves around them, before they turned and began walking back to the village. As they walked, Haruki felt a sense of peace settle over him, as though the weight of the world had been lifted, if only for a moment. He had come a long way from the boy who feared failure, from the son who struggled to meet expectations. Now, he was forging his own path, one that was uniquely his. The next few months saw Haruki's growth not only as a leader but as a person. He began to build stronger connections with his fellow shinobi, working side by side with them to ensure that the peace they had fought for would endure. He became a mentor to younger generations, teaching them not just the physical skills of a shinobi, but the emotional strength required to truly lead. His relationship with Sakura continued to grow as well, evolving into something deeper. They spent more time together, both in their personal lives and as colleagues, sharing quiet moments when the demands of their duties allowed. The bond they shared became an anchor for both of them, a constant reminder that, no matter what, they had each other's backs. It wasn't long before Haruki found himself seeking her out even more, not just for advice, but because he wanted to be near her. There was a comfort in her presence, a sense of peace that he couldn't find anywhere else. He began to realize that the feelings he had for her, once hidden under the surface, were no longer something he could ignore. One evening, after a long day of meetings and missions, Haruki found Sakura on the rooftop of the Hokage's tower. She was staring out at the village below, her expression serene, as if she were lost in thought. "Sakura," Haruki called softly, walking up behind her. "Mind if I join you?" Sakura turned, her face lighting up with a smile. "Of course not. It's been a long day, hasn't it?" Haruki nodded, sitting down beside her. "Yeah, sometimes it feels like there's so much to do, so much to keep track of. But in moments like this, it all feels quieter." Sakura chuckled softly. "The quiet is nice, but we both know how fleeting it is. But I suppose that's the nature of our lives. We fight for peace, but we never truly know when it will arrive. So we just keep going." Haruki watched her, the words she spoke resonating deep within him. He had been so focused on the future, on what he needed to do next, that he had forgotten to appreciate the present moment. The village was at peace, yes, but it was the moments like this, the quiet moments with those who mattered most, that truly made life worth living. "I've been thinking," Haruki said quietly, his gaze still on the village below. "About everything. About how much I've changed, and how much I still need to learn." Sakura turned to him, her eyes soft with understanding. "You've grown a lot, Haruki. I've seen it, and there's still so much ahead of you. But that's okay. We're always learning, always growing. And you're not alone." Haruki felt his heart skip a beat at her words. She always knew how to make him feel like he was enough, even when he doubted himself. He turned to look at her, his gaze intense. "Sakura," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I've realized something. You've always been there for me, no matter what. And I've come to understand that I want to be there for you, too. Not just as a teammate, or a friend, but as something more." Sakura's eyes widened slightly, her expression unreadable. Haruki's heart raced as he waited for her response, unsure of what she would say. But before he could second guess himself, Sakura smiled, gently, softly. "I've always known, Haruki," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've always known. And I've been waiting for you to figure it out." The world seemed to pause in that moment, as if time itself was holding its breath. Haruki reached out, taking her hand in his pulse quickening. "Then, what do we do now?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Sakura's smile deepened, and she squeezed his hand. "Now, we take it one step at a time. Together." In that moment, everything became clear. They weren't just fighting for peace in the world, they were fighting for the peace in their own hearts, for the future they would build together. And as the village lights twinkled in the distance, Haruki knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would always have the strength to face them. With Sakura by his side, and with the village they both loved, he was ready for whatever the future had in store. The days following that quiet rooftop confession felt like a slow, steady transformation in Haruki's life. Every glance exchanged with Sakura seemed to carry a deeper meaning, a shared understanding that had always been there but had now come to the forefront. They had always been comrades, always been friends, but now, they were something more, something that neither of them had fully understood until that moment. The weight of their unspoken feelings had been lifted, and in its place was something new, something exciting and fragile, like the first stirrings of spring after a long, harsh winter. But life, as it often did, had a way of testing even the strongest bonds. Haruki and Sakura, despite their newfound closeness, still carried their responsibilities. The peace they had fought for, while precious, was still fragile, and threats, both internal and external, could rear their heads at any moment. It was during one such time that the village was once again thrust into turmoil. A new faction, one that called themselves the Shattered Shinobi, had begun making waves in the Land of Fire. They were former rogue ninja, disillusioned, angry, and determined to bring down the system that had once cast them aside. Their leader was a mystery, but their intentions were clear: they wanted chaos. Haruki, as Hokage, was tasked with investigating and neutralizing the threat, and, as always, he couldn't do it alone. Sakura, ever the loyal and capable ally, stood by his side. The missions that followed were long and grueling. They ventured out into dangerous territories, crossing through forests and mountains, tracking the shattered shinobi's movements. It was in one such dense forest, as the rain fell in heavy sheets, that Haruki found himself side by side with Sakura, as the tension between them deepened, complicated by the new layer of emotion between them. As they camped one night, surrounded by the wild sound of the storm, Haruki sat by the fire, his eyes distant, lost in thought. Sakura, sitting a few feet away, kept glancing at him, sensing the weight he was carrying. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, in the furrow of his brow, that same burden he'd always worn. But now, there was something different. The burden didn't seem so heavy, not when she was by his side. But that didn't mean it was any less real. Haruki, she spoke quietly, breaking the silence. You don't have to carry all of this alone. Not anymore. He looked over at her, meeting her eyes in the dim light. For a moment, he didn't say anything. There was too much he wanted to say, too much emotion swarming inside him, but the words felt so inadequate. How could he explain to her just how much she meant to him? How much her presence, her strength, had helped him become the man he was? I know, he said finally, his voice low, almost a whisper. I don't want to. I don't want to keep pretending like everything's fine when it's not. Sakura watched him closely, her heart aching at the rawness in his tone. She had always seen the strength in Haruki, the stoic leader, but this vulnerability, this openness, was something new. Something precious. We'll get through this, she said softly, her voice reassuring, as she moved closer. Together. I know we will. He turned to face her fully now, his expression serious, but with a softness she had rarely seen in him. Sakura, when I first became Hokage, I thought I had to carry everything on my own. I thought that was what a leader was supposed to do. But I've learned so much since then. I've learned that being strong doesn't mean doing it alone. And that's something you've always known. Sakura smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. I learned it from you, too. You showed me that it's okay to lean on others. It's okay to need help. The air between them shifted, heavy with emotion. They had been through so much together, faced so many dangers, but it was in moments like this, when everything else seemed to fall away, that they could truly see each other. Haruki wasn't just the Hokage, the son of the fourth Hokage, the man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He was Haruki, the man who had been there for her, the man she had always trusted, the one who had been her anchor. You've been my strength, too, he said quietly, his voice low but firm. And not just as a teammate. You've always been there for me, even when I didn't realize it. You're more than just my comrade, Sakura. Her breath caught in her throat. She had always known, in the back of her mind, that this moment would come. That the feelings she had for Haruki, buried deep beneath the surface, would eventually rise up to the forefront. But hearing him say it, hearing him acknowledge what they both had been avoiding for so long, made everything feel real in a way it never had before. Haruki, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. She didn't know what else to say. There were no more words left to explain the depth of her feelings. But he didn't need her to say anything. Instead, he reached out, his hand gentle as he cupped her face, lifting it toward his. Their lips met in a kiss, soft and hesitant at first, as if testing the waters. But soon, the kiss deepened, and the world outside disappeared, leaving only the two of them. For a brief moment, it felt like nothing else mattered. Not the mission, not the dangers they faced. Just the warmth of each other's touch, the certainty that, whatever happened, they would always have this. As they pulled away, breathless, Haruki rested his forehead against hers. I've been so afraid of this, he admitted softly. Afraid of what it might mean, afraid of what it might change. But now I know. Sakura smiled, her hand gently resting on his chest. We'll face it together. All of it. Haruki nodded, his heart lighter than it had been in so long. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, both in the mission they were on and in their personal lives. But for the first time in a long while, he felt ready. With Sakura by his side, there was nothing they couldn't face. The storm outside raged on, but in their little camp, there was peace, a peace that they would protect, no matter the cost. Together. As the storm outside raged through the night, Haruki and Sakura sat close together by the fire, the crackling of the flames the only sound that filled the air. Their conversation had slowed, both of them lost in their thoughts, the events of the past few days and the emotions that had been uncovered still fresh in their minds. The kiss they had shared, the confession, had not only changed the air between them but had also sparked a new understanding. It wasn't just about feelings now, it was about trust, vulnerability, and the bond they had formed over years of friendship and hardship. Haruki felt the weight of everything that had happened, the responsibility of being Hokage, the pressure to protect the village, and the lingering fears of what might come next. But there was also something new growing inside him, something lighter. It was a hope he hadn't realized he was missing, a hope that maybe, just maybe, they could have something more than this constant cycle of duty and danger. Sakura, he murmured, breaking the silence. Do you ever feel like everything we do is just a part of some bigger plan we can't see? Like we're just following the steps without ever knowing where they lead? Sakura glanced up at him, her expression thoughtful. It wasn't an unfamiliar sentiment. The world of shinobi was a harsh one, where missions and duties often overshadowed personal desires, and the path forward was often uncertain. But in that uncertainty, there was still a sense of purpose, of direction. I think we're all trying to figure that out, she replied quietly. I've spent so many years chasing after something, whether it was healing or proving myself, and for a long time, I didn't know where I was headed. But now I think I'm starting to understand. Maybe the journey doesn't always have a clear end. Maybe the point is to walk it, step by step, together. Haruki looked at her, the warmth of her words settling in his chest. The uncertainty he had felt earlier seemed to fade in the face of her confidence. She was right. There was no clear answer, no final destination that promised everything would be perfect. But as long as they were together, they could face anything the future threw their way. The rain began to lighten, the intensity of the storm subsiding as the night wore on. The fire before them flickered, casting long shadows on the trees surrounding their camp. Haruki reached over and took Sakura's hand in his, the gesture simple but powerful. He didn't need to say anything, his heart spoke for him. Sakura squeezed his hand in return, a smile tugging at her lips. You know, she said, her voice playful but warm, I always thought I would end up with a life full of adventure, constantly running after some new mission or challenge. But now, with you, I think I'm ready for something different. Haruki raised an eyebrow, intrigued by her words. Different. She nodded. A life where I'm not always chasing after the next big thing. A life where I can stand beside someone, not just as a teammate, but as someone who matters to me. Someone who I can build a future with. Haruki's heart skipped a beat at her words. It was a future she was talking about. With him. He smiled softly, leaning in to kiss her forehead gently. I think we've already started building that future, Sakura. One step at a time. They sat in silence for a while, simply enjoying each other's presence, the weight of the world momentarily forgotten. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside calm and still. The fire crackled, and the sky above them, though still overcast, seemed just a little bit brighter. But even as they sat there, surrounded by the peace of the moment, the mission still loomed over them. The shattered shinobi, the group threatening the stability of the Land of Fire, were still out there, and their leader remained an enigma. Haruki knew that their work was far from over. Yet, as he sat there with Sakura, something inside him had shifted. He was no longer carrying the weight of the world alone. He had her now, and together, they could face whatever came next. As the night grew deeper, the wind quieted, and the storm's remnants turned into nothing more than a gentle breeze. Sakura's head rested on Haruki's shoulder, her breath steady and calm. He wrapped his arm around her, holding her close as they both drifted into a quiet, peaceful sleep. Tomorrow would come with new challenges, but tonight, they had each other. The next morning, the world felt different. The storm had passed, but something inside Haruki and Sakura had changed. They were still the same ninjas they had been the day before, still the Hokage and the medical ninja, but there was a new sense of clarity between them. They had shared something deeper than just their mission, something that transcended their roles as shinobi. When they packed up camp and resumed their journey toward the shattered shinobi's last known location, Haruki couldn't help but feel a sense of calm. The path ahead was uncertain, the dangers were real, but for the first time in a long while, he felt ready for whatever the future might hold. Together, they would face